Welcome to the Blessors of Israel podcast. I'm Matthew Dodd, Executive Director of Blessors of Israel. Today, I am honored to be with Jonathan Hessen. He is the CEO and host of TV7 Israel and a senior fellow with the Hudson Institute, where he specializes in geostrategy and security issues related to the Middle East and Europe, as well as other think tanks. I think it's the Jerusalem. What was that, Jonathan? Jerusalem?
The Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security.
There you go. That as well. I mean, you are a wealth of knowledge, a blessing. I tell you what, everyone I talk to, Jonathan, I say you have to check out TV7 Israel if you want to understand what is going on concerning Israel and the Middle East. What a trusted resource that is. And you are just a dear, dear brother, and it's a blessing to have you with me today for this podcast.
Thank you, Matthew. It's truly a blessing to be with you again, with all your watchers of Blessors for Israel and of Israel, by God's grace is all I can say. It's for His glory, and praise God for that.
You know, one of the things that has been on the grid is Gaza. And last week, there was news concerning Israel that focused mainly on Netanyahu's 5-point plan to end the war with Hamas. And really, except for the United States, the international response was somewhere between opposition and outrage. And then you have these nations that are scrambling to come up with an alternative plan. But most of those plans look like what we've tried to do before. And then over the weekend, there were massive demonstrations in Israel. Tens of thousands of people came out wanting an end to the war. They want the hostages to be returned. And then we're told that Hamas, they've agreed to a 60-day ceasefire, kind of going back to the Steve Witkoff plan. They'll release 10 of the 20 remaining living hostages, 18 of those who were murdered by Hamas while in captivity. And, I'm looking at all that's going on, and I'm wondering, in light of what we've learned about negotiating with Hamas, what plan do you believe will ultimately bring an end to the war, that will bring the 50 remaining hostages home and protect Israel from the existential threat on its border with Gaza?
Well, let me start by saying the obvious, and that is there is no peace without the Prince of Peace. First and foremost, full stop. And then going from here into the prism of where can we find ourselves in a scenario where Israel finds itself in a secure environment, secure enough to ensure that its people are safe within the context of the high level of safety, alongside a couple of other matters that need to be taken into consideration. I think that President Trump, on his Truth Social, he highlighted that all of the hostages will be returned once Hamas, an Islamist terrorist organization, is confronted and destroyed. Only then can all the hostages be returned. And I, unfortunately, and I say this with a heavy heart, agree with that. Since I do not see a scenario in which Hamas delivers its pawns, so to speak, or its chips, in this battle that it seeks on the one side survivability, but on the other hand, it still seeks also its relevance and the context of the ideology that it maintains, and that is the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood seeking to assert its dominance over the land of Israel and beyond. But if it is losing that position where it can fight for a conquest of Jerusalem, it will not be happy with that. It will distance itself from that goal. Now, we do need to take into account that Israel has battered Hamas into a type of oblivion, where if we really put things into context, it's no longer a terror army. We're talking here about a relatively small terror group, very poorly equipped, unable to hold itself within really the high intensity warfare that Israel does have planned for it in the days and weeks ahead, potentially even months ahead, in the event where those type of negotiations that we're now hearing are taking place behind closed doors, with the proposal from Qatar and Egypt being brought forth. If that doesn't go through, Hamas will be taken out. And what does it actually mean, taken out? It means that it will be placed in a position where it won't survive the day after. Where even though every officer, commander, above the rank of company commander was already eliminated. Those don't exist in Gaza anymore. And therefore, dealing also with those who bear arms and have pledged allegiance to the Muslim Brotherhood will really eradicate the type of protection that their families have in the day Israel pulls out and the rival militias come in, and they won't abide by any international rules of engagement, right? The laws of war are not the domain of terrorist organizations and clan-like Islamist militias. And therefore, Hamas knows that if it is put in that position, it might include future massacres against its people, against its clans, against its its tribal construct. So it is in a very tough position. Now, the international pressure that we are seeing is very hefty. We are seeing the international community coming to terms with a reality where this type of resistance will be pushed back, and that Israel would be positioned in a very, very strong starting point to even potentially get to if it wishes, to a point where a two-state solution is no longer viable. And as we know that this two-state solution is the aspired solution, as they view it, of the international community, of Western countries. Why? Because of the partition plan. Despite the fact that the Arabs rejected it in the partition plan, they still came to a position where the international community seeks to impose this, irrespective of what the parties want. If we look in Israel today, post October 7th, the majority of people in Israel do not believe a two-state solution is viable. They just saw what happened to their fellow countrymen. 1,200 massacred.
But prior to
4,800 wounded.
October 7th, you had a lot of support for a two-state solution. I think you're exactly right. Afterwards, that pivoted everything. They realized we're dealing with this existential threat. There is no way that we can survive like this with that threat on our border.
Right. And it goes even beyond that. I mean, if we look at the Palestinian street, the Arab street in Judea, Samaria, the Jordan Valley, and the Gaza Strip, the last election, if that's an indication to the trend that we could see about the so-called two-state solution, the one championing the term of two states for two peoples living side by side in peace and security, as is defined by the international community, was an individual called Salam Fayyad, a prime minister of the Palestinian Authority for a certain period of time. Shimon Peres, the late president, and other various positions held throughout since the establishment of the State of Israel, has defined Salam Fayyad as the Ben Gurion of the Palestinians at some point. He ran in the last legislative council elections. He only gained 2.41% of the general tally, meaning that is the group of Palestinians, so-called, who aspire for a two-state solution. The remainder do not see it as a two-state solution. It's all a matter of tactics. The one seeks the so-called mukawama in Arabic, resistance, to pursue an armed struggle until the point where Jews in the land of Israel tell themselves it's not worth living for in the land of Israel, and therefore we want to leave. That is their tactic. On the other hand, you have the Fatah faction, which is the predominant controlling faction within the Palestinian Authority, that believes to position themselves within the international fora and within the bounds of reality as we know it, to establish the state of Israel on indefensible borders from which they then will be able to persist until the point in time where Israel will become an unviable state. Demographics also speak. Demographics meaning the composition of the people of the land. And if we look at the composition of the people of the land, there are far more Muslim babies today than there are Jewish babies in the land. And therefore, we do need to take that into context. Now, ironically, within the so-called Green Line, the 1967 lines, there is right now actually a trend where the Arab community is diminishing in the fertility rates, right? The number of babies that they bring, as opposed to the Jews, where the Jewish ultra-Orthodox community has families of 6, 7, 8, and 9 children, right? So we're seeing this demographic not necessarily predicting the right trend from an Arab perspective. So they're reevaluating their different activities for the long run. But all in all, it is a complicated theater, as you know. And when we're talking about, going back to the core of your question, what is the solution? There are different schools of thought. The prevailing school of thought highlights a compartmentalization, or they call it the Machiavellian approach, where each neighborhood has a dominating clan, which is then granted executive powers for that neighborhood and that town and that city, which will ultimately splinter Palestinian society to the point where they will no longer seek to confront Israel directly, but rather seek to focus on their own neighborhood and their own survivability.
Makes sense. So they'll be so decentralized now that they got to compete for the greater whole by fighting with one another.
Right, with, of course, various types of incentives that are accommodating the local cultural constructs that relate to the Arab street rather than Western perceptions, right? The two do not accommodate one another whatsoever, and therefore we need to see that the local Palestinian street, the Arab street, the Muslim street, the Christian street within the Arab construct, I won't say many, but I say the majority, and that is even more than many, right? The majority of the people in the Christian street, unfortunately, and I'm talking about the so-called conservative churches, are Christians by name. And therefore, within that context, there are much more nationalist Palestinians than they are Christians, right? And we do need to take that into context and be very wary and highlight that, of course, we do not know their hearts, and it's a relationship between them and God, but ultimately, by their fruits, we will recognize them. Exactly. And therefore, we do need also to identify and be very vigilant to the complexities at hand.
So, in light of everything that we've learned after October 7th about Hamas, Iran, Hezbollah, I mean, all of this, the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, is coming out saying we've got a committee working on a constitution for a Palestinian state. Why is it that the West continues to push for this two-state solution when it's very clear that the Palestinian community, Iran, they do not want a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution. They want, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free of Israel, of the Jews. Why does the West still think this is a viable solution?
for domestic purposes. It's not anymore about what's viable. It's about what domestic consumption is triggered by. And therefore, when you, for the last 30 some years, sell a story, or more than 30 some years, but technically since the Oslo Accords and the lead up to it, we saw a very robust investment in a perceived solution to a conflict that in today's global dynamic, where Western civilization has more and more Muslims who are very dominant in their approach and very aggressive in their approach, alongside a very radical left where the fringes are very activist in nature and therefore also very politically inclined, as opposed to the silent majority that is just not interested in politics in most cases. These fringes and radical elements in society require something to chew on, so to speak. And therefore, when they provide that, when leaders in Britain or in Australia or in Canada go out and provide that, we're talking here about very weak leaders who are dealing with domestic woes that they don't want to be dealing with. Well, take French President Emmanuel Macron, for instance. We're talking here about a president with 12% approval ratings as we speak, meaning that his domestic audience is not buying what he's selling. So going for a two-state solution at a time when this issue is so contentious, and really trying to focus on foreign relations to try to establish a posture as a global leader rather than a domestic failure, is what he started to pursue. And we're seeing this happening with, the Prime Minister in Australia, Albanese. We're seeing this, Keir Starmer in the UK and other locations. So we're seeing more and more of this. And quite interestingly, those same countries that are trying to promote support for Ukraine are not realizing that their biggest Republican supporters are actually the most pro-Israel group in the Republican Party. And therefore, what they're doing is they're establishing resentment to leaders who are pushing a certain narrative on the one hand, but are pushing a complete detached other narrative on the other. And unfortunately, this is becoming more of a international phenomena where, again, leaders who are failing domestically are using the Israel-Palestine, so to speak, conflict as a pawn in their toolbox.
To gain that domestic support, get the leverage that they need so that they can live another day, so to speak, in the
Right.
when the election comes. I want to shift gears real quickly with the time that we have left. The last time we were together, I asked you a question in regards to Iran. And I said, what leverage do they have? And at that time, you said, really, they don't have anything. And then 2 days later, June 13th, 2025 hits. You texted me, in fact, in regards to the notification by the U.S. to have different people within the Israel region. If they're not necessarily supposed to be there, they can come home, if they're working for the State Department and whatnot. And then Israel strikes Iran's ballistic, their nuclear, their scientists, their military leaders. And you just see for that 12 days, quite a revelation, I believe, in regards to Israel and their capabilities, their intelligence, and Iran and their capabilities and intelligence. And I wanted to get your perspective in regards to lessons learned about both. What do we learn about Israel? What do we learn about Iran, both with regards to their intelligence clearly, and then also with regards to their capabilities from a military standpoint?
I think it's not only about Israel and Iran, it's what did we learn about other countries in the region? Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United States, European actors. One thing we learned is that don't mess with God's plan. I spoke to a aloof, a general here in the army, and he told me something that I think really puts everything into context. Our God is a mighty God, and he's far stronger and omnipotent in all essence, and he just won their God. Right? And that is something. This is the proclamation of the God, the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, sitting on his throne, and against all odds, bringing about a new reality that nobody expected.
I couldn't agree more, and I think people tend to forget, going back to the Word of God, God's plan for Israel, the promise that he made to Abram, an unconditional, unilateral promise, a covenant that was established, not conditioned on Israel's capabilities, their ability to obey and keep God's commands. God put the burden on himself to do all of this for Israel. And that's one of the things we talk about here at Blessors of Israel, is that here we have these unconditional unilateral covenants with Israel. And I think what you mentioned a moment ago is case in point, where Israel's outgunned, they're outmanned. On paper, it looks like Iran is much stronger than we ever thought we would see demonstrated during that 12-day war. And yet God stepped in and intervened and did a mighty work with great precision. It was amazing to behold.
Well, absolutely. And it's, again, when you see conflict and you study conflict, you look at things in a certain power or escalation dominance, we call it. So you basically, you have a ladder with the level of violence you use in that ladder, and it's pre-planned, right? And they have their escalation dominance ladder, so to speak, with their ladder of how much violence they apply. The scenarios that we're trained for here in Israel, I mean, the devastation expected was so far more than what actually occurred, to the point where people actually acknowledge this is a miracle. I mean, the Iranians did not manage. They inflicted damage. I mean, every missile with, half a ton warhead, it shatters an entire neighborhood, right? But the number of missiles that managed to penetrate, while at the same time Israel really being able to preempt the majority of those before even being fired, with the number of projectiles falling out of the sky and failing to cross out of Iranian airspace, just out of the blue, with help, without help, we do not know, right? But it really showed that there is a power disparity here that everybody's going to take note of. And in that context, it also amplifies that a nation united shall not fall. It really is the manifestation of significant efforts invested, hours upon hours of meticulous work, with God's grace, again, a lot of miracles, right? But while Iran almost topped its escalation dominance ladder to almost the top of where it could project power outside of its bounds, of its border, Israel, and I say this with a lot of confidence, did not even reach the half bar of what it had planned for the Iranians.
Wow.
And the Iranians might feel that they are rushing to really prepare themselves for what's to come. But they have yet to experience the wrath of what Israel had planned for them. In contrast to what some nations in the region might think.
Now, what's interesting is you talked about other actors such as Egypt, Saudi Arabia, but we also know that Iran has close alliances with Russia, with China, with North Korea, obviously Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas. What I thought was interesting is how quiet they were. Yeah, they leveled some protest, strong statements, but in terms of actually getting kinetically involved, there wasn't any involvement that I'm aware of from any of them. What are we to take from that? I mean, how should we interpret the strength of those alliances?
So look, Russia is bogged down in its war with Ukraine. Its ranks depleted, its arsenals depleted, despite having a very robust production scale. It needs those arms. It cannot spare. I know that Iran actually relayed a request to Russia to receive a new arsenal of surface-to-air capabilities to protect themselves. The answer was no. They don't have those type of systems to spare right now. China, on the other hand, does provide some material support. It's limited. It's limited to type of munitions that have already been tested in the battle, particularly between India and Pakistan. But the major systems that the Iranians want, China has said no to. And the reason for that is that China does not want to show its hand, so to speak, when we're talking about prospects of conflagration in the future with the United States and its allies.
Taiwan, right?
In Taiwan, right. Some say that it could be as early as the end of this year. So those are things that need to be taken into account. Now, the calculus may have shifted in Beijing over what happened in the Middle East. But nonetheless, those are calculations that still need to be taken into account. So, to really sum it up, if I may, I think that the power disparity between Israel and Iran has recalibrated the entire Middle East and the entire world. North Korea continues to provide, material and human support to Russia. I doubt it will seek to do so with Iran as well. Maybe partially so, but not in a full-fledged manner. And the Chinese are still in a strategic power competition setting, so they will assist. But don't forget, what triggered the timing of this attack was 80,000 dual-use components for Iran to oversaturate its ballistic missile program in parallel to its nuclear program, which was granted by the Iranians. That for itself is something that Israel could not accept, and as such it acted. What's interesting, after Israel acknowledged that the oversaturation of ballistic missiles may pose a threat to Israel's home front, its populations, its city centers, and so on, the Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, announced that they're going to focus on their ballistic missile program. And they're going to oversaturate and build up their arsenals, with the latest announcement being a Turkish project or a memorandum of understanding with Somalia to test new ballistic missiles. So we're seeing the threat moving from the east to the north. To what degree is that threat real? It will become real at some point, right? And Israel needs to take that into account. Of course, de-escalate where possible, but at the same time, those matters need to be considered. What we're seeing in Syria is very alarming and should be also taken into account.
Agreed.
So all those variables need to be closely monitored, fervently prayed for by the body of Christ around the world, and to remain vigilant.
One question before we close. How far back, because there's a lot of debate about this, after the bunker busters hit the nuclear facilities, Fort al-Natanz, Isfahan, how far back, based on your assessment, was Iran set back in terms of their nuclear program?
So I think it's going to be more than 3 years, far more than 3 years. And what I mean is, Iran is not going to attempt anything during the Trump administration. It's going to consider its actions very carefully. It's now in the process, just during the 12-day conflict and the days thereafter, Iran arrested 22,000 people on claims of espionage. Naturally, the majority, if not all of them, are safe. To say that they're not party to any espionage rings. But nonetheless, it realized, to its own detriment, the level of penetration of Israeli and other types of intelligence agencies into Iranian ranks. And therefore, for it to pursue a covert nuclear program in some remote location at a place where nobody knows about, it will not know whether nobody knows about it because it's that heavily penetrated, right? So it's paranoid right now.
Wow.
Now that paranoia at some point will potentially subside, and it may attempt different methods to evade detection. But both the United States and Israel guaranteed that if Iran pursues some type of nuclear program, they would relaunch an attack. So that is something we do know. And therefore, I do not see it happening 3 years from now. So they're going to leave it for now. Because Israel and the United States and every other intelligence agency continues to scrutinize them everywhere. Meanwhile, I also believe that other forms of Iranian activities are to be expected, to include a soft power campaign to soar up the anti-Israel sentiments in the United States, to try and isolate it, which would then allow them to pursue some type of program, and then block it by pressuring the United States to do so. And that is something that the United States needs to fight against. And I think that it is fighting against it right now on several levels.
Well, Jonathan, wrapping things up, I want to make sure that those who are watching right now and those who partner with Blessors of Israel, they can learn more about you, TV7 Israel. How do we follow you online?
So you can watch via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. Obviously, the scope of what I do goes beyond that, but nonetheless, on TV7 Israel News you can watch. You can watch us also on a couple of channels in the United States, be it NRB TV or Rock Church Television or TCT. We have also one program there, and TBN Pacific, which also goes to the West Coast, if I'm not mistaken, partially. So there are different methods to watch us, but the easiest and most direct way is through TV7IsraelNews.com and our YouTube channel at Israel TV7 Israel News.
And I want to encourage everyone, check it out. When it's very difficult today to find, with so much noise out there, to find true signal in regards to what's going on regarding Israel and the Middle East. And I really believe that what you're doing, Jonathan, is a valuable resource to the body of Christ, to the community of faith as a whole. And I'm just so grateful you take this time to meet with me today, to answer some of these questions and give us the insights that you have regarding Israel and the Middle East. And I want to thank those who are watching right now. So blessed that you have taken the time to join us. And I want to encourage you, especially for those who are visiting for the very first time, to take a look at our website. Go to www.blessors.org. That's Blessors with an ORS.org. There you will learn about our vision and our mission as an organization. Love to have you also check out our newsroom. There you'll see curated news concerning Israel and the Middle East, along with original articles with the biblical perspective. If you haven't done so already, make sure you like this podcast and subscribe to whatever channel you're watching right now. You can follow us on Facebook, X, and Getter. And we truly appreciate and covet your prayers and your financial support as we build this new and important ministry. Remember, those who bless Israel will be blessed. Shalom, shalom.